Saddle up your horses.
And, hold on. Got it. And we're at it again, guys. That was weird. In my hair. Is that really weird stage where you just got it cut? Do I still have a hair tie? I don't. Whatever. We're at it again. And today I'm doing Alanna. Okay, so I've already done Tamora Pierce's Becca Cooper series, which I can't say enough good things about. When I was a wee youngster, I found the Alanna series at my middle school library, and I loved it. I've read this series so many times. However, I gotta say, it's not that great. I hate to say that because it has been like top 5 on my list for nigh on 20 years. Like that nigh on. But you can tell this is her first series. You can tell it's a bit outdated. The writing just isn't on par with what we are used to now. And so I will forever love the Alanna series. And I think that the concept is great. The world building is great. The creativity is fantastic. But the actual writing is really juvenile. If you do not know about Tamora Pierce, oh gosh, guys, give me a minute. If you don't know Tamora Pierce, she is a fantasy writer, and she has created this whole universe of Tortall based around wizards and knights and gallantry and magic and a lot of great stuff. And it all starts with Alanna. And so this first book, if you saw my Becca Cooper series, you know that this book was actually part of a larger series that someone said break it up. So there's 4 of them. And I think that is really why this book in many senses feels incomplete. But Alanna, the first book, which is Alanna, the First Adventure, it just introduces us to Alanna, who wants to be a knight. However, in this day and age, women were not knights. And so she has a twin brother named Tom who wants to be a sorcerer. However, he is supposed to go learn how to be a knight. They switch places. She goes to the palace to learn how to be a knight. So it works out for both of them. But she has to pretend that she's a boy to everyone there. She gets there when she's like 10, 11, and she cannot be a knight until she's 18. So her grand plan is to hide her identity for 8 years. Spoiler alert, by the end of this book, quite a few people know. There is George, who, here's another spoiler for like the end of the series. No, I'm not going to go there. Anyways, there's George Cooper, who is the king, the rogue. He is like the king thief. So she needs him for certain things, and eventually she has to let him in on her secret. And then there is Prince Jonathan, who she befriends on her first day. At the end of this book, she reveals to him, or it is revealed to him, that she is a girl. So the book really just details her first days as a page, and then it kind of goes into basically 4 years, which, even if this had been part of the larger anthology, I don't think would have made it any better. Thankfully, my remembrance was wrong, that it doesn't cover 8 years, it just covers 4. But part of my problem with this book is, I mean, guys, as a 12, 13, 14-year-old, I loved it. I had no problems. I mean, honestly, up till probably college, I didn't notice any of these problems. But as an adult, as someone who surrounds herself with books, is trying to be in the publishing industry, there is just a lot that Pierce is trying to tackle. She doesn't have time to tackle. It honestly feels like she handed over the large book. Someone said, let's cut it into 4, and that's what they did. I think this book is 8 chapters long, and each chapter is like 80 pages? I know that, hold on, let me make sure I actually got that right. And actually, I found a typo. Right here. Don't you love finding typos in published books? 7 chapters. 7 chapters long, guys. So 7 times 4 is what, 42? So like, I guess that's an average book. And yes, it is small. So even though each chapter is really long in terms of pages, Maybe if it were larger, it wouldn't have felt so long. But confession time, I had this on my calendar to do. I don't know why I put it on my calendar for this day and time. I just did. And then I realized I've not read it. Like, yes, I could do it from memory, but as we all know, I enjoy doing it fresh. And so I had a week to read it, to review it, to edit the video. And so I was like, I gotta get through this. And I remember right as I got out of college, I was working at camp, and I was like, all right, so when we drive from location A to location B, I'm gonna bring my book, I'm gonna read it, it will keep me busy on the drive to and from. I finished it on the drive there, so I was like, okay, it won't take that long. But it felt long, and that's a huge problem for me. And it really just goes back to the fact that Pierce is trying to cover a lot of ground, and so she doesn't develop the world as carefully as she could. Here are some major players in the book. There's Alanna, there's her manservant Coram, there's Prince Jonathan, and then there's Raoul, Gary, and Alex. So we have these 4 main boys, and then there is a bully named Alanna of Malvin. I should know that, but whatever. And then there is Miles, who is her history teacher, who becomes something of a father figure to her. And then there's Tom. And then there is Duke Roger, who is Prince Jonathan's cousin. But the whole deal is, what I'm trying to get at here is Jonathan and his 3 friends. Over the course of this series, and this is something that I see, which is why I feel like they just literally cut it into 4, where you see the buildup, you see how they introduce certain concepts that will then be developed later. So, but for this one book, the characters just did not get enough time to be developed. Take Alex, for instance. He is an easily forgettable character because we get a decent bit of Raoul and Gary and Jonathan and kind of their gang of guys, and then we get Alex, kind of like literally his name just thrown in there, but we don't actually get much interaction with him. And so I'm like, why in the world does he matter? And actually, then there's another guy named Francis, who gets even less screen time, and then Francis ends up dying. And so with Francis, I'll give it to Pierce because, as I said, this is a world that involves magic. But Alanna is scared of her magic. She's like, I just don't want to use it. But before she even comes to the palace to train, the village healing woman, she and Tom go to her and are like, look, this is our plan. Can you kind of read some tea leaves? Not really, but that's the concept. Like, look into the future, tell us if this is going to be a good idea. And afterwards, she looks at Alanna and she's like, you need to use your magic. Like, you're going to take lives, you also need to be able to save lives. So Francis dies, and Alanna is like, all right, if I'd used my magic, I could have helped him, which I'll get into that later. Alex, though, he is such a throwaway character, and we get more of him in the next book because he becomes Duke Roger's squire, and then things transpire there, but I'm not going to get ahead of myself. But I was just like, she has so many main characters. And this is a 200-odd page book. Yeah, literally 216 pages, 7 chapters. She doesn't have enough time for all of these characters. I honestly don't know how she could have done it any better, except if she had expanded the book. Because Alex does become, not a key player later on, but he does become someone where you're like, they were friends. Look at what happened. It's not that I think we shouldn't have Alex, but I just thought that Pierce involved too much. Like, if she had perhaps cut even this into 2 books and then looked at the first 2 years of the page or the last 2 years of the page and been able to expand and to build and to show us all of Alanna's struggles. Because what's so intriguing is the fact that she's pretending to be a boy. And so we get just bits and pieces about how she handles puberty And sometimes you're just like, I need more. You know, I need more to convince me to care. I need more to convince me that this is a real struggle for you. Or as a female, she is naturally smaller than her male counterparts. Ergo, she has to work harder at certain physical aspects of her training, like swordplay, wrestling, all that kind of stuff. I do feel that Pierce did a good job with what she had. She got the major points out there. You saw the struggles, you saw the triumphs, but I felt like, for one, not only did Alanna and her cohorts come into this feeling older than they were, more capable than maybe they should have been, but then whenever she did face a challenge, because she does face challenges, it's not like she just gets there and she's naturally good at everything, but it's like, all right, well, because she has so much grit and determination, she's just gonna practice till the cows come home, and then she's gonna be an expert, and there we go. Everybody's gonna love her, and they're gonna think she's so great, which she is because she worked hard at it, but we don't get to see any of that. Her first fencing lesson, she completely fails. And so she goes to Corum and she says, I don't understand what happened. My brain knew what to do, but my body didn't. And so he's like, some people are natural at it, some people never learn it, and some people actually have to work for it. And so she's like, all right, I see where you're going. I've got to work for it. Give me your sword. He's a grown man. She's an 11-year-old child. So yes, I get it. Like, it's going to be hard for her, but honestly, we don't see any of that. Pierce tells us she constantly works at it. She works at it in the morning, she works at it at night. But I wanted to see those first few practices when he first hands over his adult male sword to an 11-year-old girl. Not to say girls can't do it, but when I was an 11-year-old girl, I mean, I wasn't the scrawniest thing in the world, but like, I don't think I could have wielded a grown man's sword. So I really would have enjoyed seeing some of this physical building process of her learning how to handle a sword. Or like I told you, she has an enemy, Rowland. He just picks on all the smaller kids, the younger kids, and she, because she's plucky, is like, not gonna work, not gonna work. But he keeps coming after her, so they have a scuffle, he beats her, and so again, like in the future with the sword, she's like, I'm gonna take matters into my own hand. I'm gonna figure out how to defeat him. And so what she does is she goes to George, who teaches her hand-to-hand combat, essentially. So then she's able to call Rowland out, she's able to defeat him, and then he leaves the palace, which, when I think about this book and the structure, that's another problem I have, is that they just sliced off the first 1/4 of the book. And so it doesn't have it doesn't follow the normal structure of a book. But if you want to give it to her, I would say that Alanna defeating Rowland is the midpoint, because it's where she proves herself kind of to herself as well as to other people. Jumps her first hurdle, she's able to get rid of her first foe. But it's so easy. That is the thing, is I know it's not easy because I'm told, but I don't really get to see any of it until the showdown, and then she's victorious each and every time. And these victories kind of go hand in hand with the problems that I have with the characters. Overall, really great characterization. I see each character is an individual to an extent, but they, as I said, they're all so mature. Their thoughts, their actions, their wisdom is like of an adult, of a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old. So along with these victories, they're just able to handle things with a skill level that I feel does not suit, especially because I would classify this as YA, because the series as a whole, it's kind of like Harry Potter, where it starts as middle grade MG and it gets into more adult themes, which makes it YA. But this book in particular is middle grade. It's not until the next book that she's 14 or 15 legitimately, and then she gets to her ordeal of knighthood, and she has all these other more teenagery things happening. There might be one point in this book, maybe two, in which she truly felt young. The first is when she first gets to the palace, she realizes how hard it's gonna be. She storms over to Corum's room. She's like, pack your bags, we're leaving. And he's like, I mean, if you want me to, I will. But, like, I didn't really see you as a quitter. And then the next one is when she gets her first period and she's like, oh, I'm bleeding to death. Well, not to death, but she was like, what is wrong with me? And I guess she had no woman in her life to tell her about that kind of stuff because her mom had died. But honestly, I just thought Alanna was intelligent enough, had heard enough to know, but maybe I guess her reaction was sort of age appropriate because she was like, I'm super scared. Although at the same time, I thought it was kind of ludicrous, like blown out of proportion just a little bit, but what you gonna do? But let's roll it back to Frances. So there's a point in the novel where the entire city was struck by the sweating sickness. What exactly that means, I don't know. They're sick because they start sweating, or like an excessive amount of sweating means that they're near death. Not sure. But people start to get sick, people start to die, and it's obvious that this is not natural. Somehow, it's sorcery. And these are crumbs here. Not necessarily crumbs for this book, crumbs for the last book, which would have been fine if they were all one book. But in this one, you feel just like you're getting dangled on a hook. But yeah, so the queen gets sick, a couple of other important people get sick. Frances ends up getting sick. And I gotta say, this was a moment that I didn't think was particularly necessary because of lack of development, but we just get this little insert, like maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs, in which Alanna is woken up in the middle of the night to be told that Frances is sick. Couldn't we have waited till morning for that? Like, he's not an important character. He's not the king, he's not the queen, he's not one of our best friends. I mean, I guess technically he is, but he's such a minor character. You're almost like, who's Frances? We get a paragraph, a sentence, where we think, oh, this is where we announce that Jonathan is sick. No, it's Frances. I'm like, okay, I forgot about Frances, and how many times have I read this book? But so Frances ends up dying. And then when Jonathan gets sick, she says, it's gotta be me, because by this point, all of the palace healers, all the healers in the land or whatever, just can't. They're overloaded. They're dying themselves. Something about this sickness kind of absorbs their gifts. And so she's fresh, even though she's largely untrained. And she's like, I can save Jonathan. I did not use my magic to heal Frances, but I can save Jonathan because he's the only heir to the kingdom. And so she does. I made a note about this because she wants to resort to basically holistic remedies. And then somebody is like, look, those aren't helping, which, didn't we already know that? I'm pretty sure that going into his room, you knew you were going to have to use your magic. So why didn't we just start there? In any case, when somebody says, look, Alan, her name is Alan for all intents and purposes, you gotta use your magic. She says, okay, the only thing I know to do is this certain spell. And I'm like, and she's like, I don't really know how to do it. I've never done it before. I'm like, so how do you know how to do it? For me, I'm thinking it's just a concept. It is something that she'd heard of from the village healing woman, because she did get a rudimentary education, but as I said, she's afraid of her magic, so she wasn't going to put a whole lot of effort into it. I don't know, maybe she retained more information than she actually practiced, so when it came to using it, she knew of the spell, but then she's like, I could die from it. I mean, not even, it drains, because your magic is essentially, or your gift is attached to your life force. So at a certain point, you start to use your own life force because that's all you have left of your gift. I don't think she means that. I think she means there's mortality attached to this spell. Which to me says, you are nowhere near prepared to do this spell. Neither here nor there. She reaches into herself, calling out to the mother goddess, who, up to this point, the gods and the goddesses, they're kind of a big deal in this realm. Like, that's who the people pray to. We've heard very little outside of, like, maybe saying, oh, the gods, or oh, the mother goddess. But Alanna is touched by the goddess, and so she's able to dig deep within herself to call forth the mother goddess, and the mother goddess infuses her with the ability to bring Jonathan forth from the dead, and there we go. And I was just like, as a 13, 14-year-old, as someone who reads for enjoyment, who doesn't really know what good writing looks like, caveat, Pierce has gotten better, but her early works, sign of the times, man. There's just so much left to be desired. And so when I read it now, honestly, I don't even know how many more times I can read it. First, let me tell you, don't listen to the audiobooks. Audiobooks are so bad. It is painful. So not only will I not be rereading this book via audiobook, but I don't know if I could even read it. That's why I actually did this one, because here, this is kind of off topic. I've already done reviews for 2 books in the next series because I was trying to, before I really started this channel, I was trying to get through it all, and so I was listening to those 2, and I was like, I'll just record them, and then I'll get back to everything else eventually. They were so painful that I said, these books are short enough, small enough, I can get through it quickly and not want to gouge my eyes out. But that reminds me, not the gouging out, but their narration. This book, actually the series, both series, actually all the series, third person past, and then particularly this series, I think the Immortal series as well, are omniscient narrator. And, well, what that means is that the narrator knows everything that's going on. The problem here is I feel like Pierce kind of forgets that she's an omniscient narrator, and she gets so close to Alanna that every time she pulls back, I get so thrown out of sync with the story that I'm like, excuse me, what just happened? And so what I mean by that is you're in Alanna's head, and this is called head hopping. You're in Alanna's head, and then all of a sudden you know what Coram is thinking, or you know what Jonathan is thinking, or so there's a scene where Alanna gets her first horse. George is like, I got something for you, so come. And she's like, well, I'm gonna bring Jonathan because I don't really know anything about horses. So she brings Jonathan, and we go from Alanna's perspective of meeting this horse and deciding, can I afford it? And yes, I can. I just can't have chocolate for the rest of my life. To Jonathan pulling, and this is like the next paragraph, there's no delineation here, to Jonathan pulling George aside and saying, look, I know that you paid like 3 times that amount for this horse. What's going on? They have this whole little encounter. Where did that come from? That was not the omniscient narrator looking down. That was us being in a character's head and then being in a completely different character's head, completely ignoring our first character to have a little side conversation. It is so annoying. I've said it before in my Becca Cooper review. I would love for Pierce to rewrite this series. If you saw my Becca Cooper reviews, you know how big those books are. I mean, they're yay big, 4 times as thick. And I think because Pierce is as established as she is, she could go back, rewrite these books, expand them a little bit. Whether she ever will, whether actually the publishing industry would let her, I think the fans would let her. I don't know. There's just so much she could do to improve this series, to improve this book, period. In terms of story, she accomplished what she wants to accomplish, but I don't think, unless maybe I have kids or I'm babysitting or something and I'm reading it to children, I don't think I can ever actually read this series again. I can take the love I have for the concept. I know the overall idea. I know the overall outcome. And I can carry that with me in my heart for the rest of my life. But I honestly do not think I could read this again because it is so painful. I mean, there were moments where I was just like, I was bored. Now, how do you get bored in a book this small? Which reminds me, speaking of moments that could have been expanded or expounded upon, Alanna has a teacher named Miles, and he has this recurring dream that involves her at his estates. So he's like, all right, I guess the gods are telling me something. I'm going to bring her to my estates. So they go, and there are ruins at this estate. And in the ruins, she ends up finding this magical sword, and it becomes an important part of her journey. But these ruins are a huge missed opportunity. And that is something I remember thinking from my very first read, where I was like, did I miss something? Because the whole idea about the ruins are the old ones. We never, throughout the Alanna series, throughout the Immortal series, I mean, maybe in her Circle of Magic series, which I have not read and I never will read, she mentioned it, but in no other series, maybe in her Numenera series, she'll get into it. But as far as what she's already written, we never, ever learn who the old ones are. All you can assume is they were an ancient race. They were the predecessors. They were the ancestors. I get the feeling that they're a bit more magically powerful. They're more godlike. I don't know. But so we get to these ruins, and it's really beautiful. Super great world building, creativity. But it stops there. Because, as I said, we never learn who these people are, why their civilization became what it was, why everything went to pot. And so, as I said, Alanna finds the sword. But first, before she can find the sword, she actually has to locate the sword. She and Miles are at the ruins of this house. And, they're walking around. And she's like, oh, I think I found the armory. And he's like, you know what? I'm more of a kitchenware guy, so you can hang out here. So she finds this black slab with a handle on it, and she's like, I'm gonna open that. And it won't open. It won't budge. And he comes over, he's like, yeah, I've never been able to get that thing to open. And so she's just pulling on it, and she gets it to open. And he's like, And he kind of already suspects something's weird because he was in the room when she saved Jonathan, and part of that whole magical process was, I guess, calling forth her future womanness. I don't really know how it all works, but in any case, so he heard a female voice coming out of her. And so now he's seen her do something where he looks at her and he goes, and because she's all triumphant. She's like, look what I did. And he goes, the last time I tried to open that, I was 16. And I had a friend here, and he's now the local blacksmith, which means he's strong, but he was no weakling back then either, and we could not get it to open. She's like, there must have been dirt in the gears. She gets this slab open, and the only thing I can attribute to her success is because it's in the god's will. Essentially, she's at his estate because the gods want her to be there, so I guess they enabled her to open it. I don't know if they did it. I don't know if they just gave her the strength to do it. Again, there's a lot left unsaid here. She's like, I'm gonna go down in there. And Miles is like, excuse you, we don't have a torch. And she goes, that's fine, I've got the gift. So she conjures magical fire. She goes down into this pitch black, and there's this entity down there. We never learn what this entity is. We never learn how it got there, how long it's been there. Has it been like trapped down in there? And so she gets to the end and she sees this sword with a crystal hilt. But just as she gets the sword, this entity takes hold of her and basically is suffocating her. And at that last moment when she accepts death, the crystal hilt blazes to life, pushes this evil entity out of her, saves her life, and she gets out. She gets back to school, and she doesn't like Duke Roger. Something in her says he's not a good guy. So she gets back to school, and she's been telling people that Miles gifted her this sword. And so at this point, she is taking magic lessons. There's a magic class because Roger has been summoned to the palace since the sweating sickness in order to equip the young generations. And he's like, oh, let me see your sword. She lets him look at it, and he's freaking out. Like, he automatically knows there's something more to this sword than she's letting people know. There's something more to her discovery of this sword than she's letting people know. And then he's like, oh, can you make the crystal glow? She's like, I'm not gonna actually try to make the crystal glow. So she pretends. He's like, be on your way. So it's like, he knows there's something more to this sword. And then at the very end, the sword comes into play again. And so there's obviously something huge that surrounds these ruins, that surrounds the old ones, but we never get any of it. It's so underdeveloped, but there's so much potential there, and it drives me crazy. We never learn what all that has to do with anything. Honestly, they never even mention the old ones again. I'm just so disappointed that she had this amazing opportunity and she opened up a door and she was like, there it is. But we're not even gonna go anywhere near the door. I'm just gonna tell you there's a door there and there's something really cool on the other side, and then we're gonna leave. So it's really disappointing. But the end. The book doesn't really follow the structure, the normal structure of a book, in that it has kind of that opening, and then we get to our exciting event, our key event, and then we have our midpoint. Like, there's really no midpoint except for maybe her battle with Rowland. But we definitely have a climax, which is when the big boys, Jonathan and his friends, are going to this city, and it's the city of the Basher, who are basically this indigenous desert people. And Prince Jonathan's like, I want Alan to come with us, because obviously there'd be no story without Alanna, although actually there really is, because there are many times that we pull away from her and have nothing to do with her. But he's like, I need Alan to come with us. Like, I think he deserves to come with us. He's shown us that he can do this. And right before they go off to the city, Duke Roger, who you suspect is using some kind of magic for mind control or implanting his will upon people, but he basically dares Prince Jonathan to do something. And that is, so the Basher, they're nomads. And so it's like, why did the Basher build a city? And the rumor is that they built this city to look over another city. And so that is the Black City, in which, you know, every year, a couple years, I forget how many, honestly, I actually kind of skimmed over this part because I just didn't care. The youth, Basher youth, will disappear. And the rumor is that they go to the Black City and they are basically sacrifices of some sort or another. And so Roger dares Jonathan to go to the Black City. And so, wouldn't you know it, on the first night, Alanna wakes up and she hears Prince Jonathan. And so he's like, I'm going to the Black City. So she's like, well, I'll come with you. Because, yeah, she's got non-existent balls of steel, okay? And so they get there and they encounter the, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. It starts with a Y, and then it goes into an S. So I don't know if it's just the Sander or the Ysander. We'll call them the Ysander because it's just more fun that way. So they encounter the Ysander. There's like 10 of them, and I don't know if they're immortals or if they're gods. They think of themselves as gods. They feed off of mortal lives. Of course, Jonathan and Alanna fight them, and this is where it's revealed to Jonathan that she's a girl. And so, you know, they're ultimately able to defeat the Ysander because of Alanna's sword and stuff and blah. And then, you know, the book ends. Like, they don't even make it back to this Badger city. They only make it back to the oasis, in which, because Jonathan is about to be a knight, and so she's like, well, who are you going to choose to be your squire? Or he says, who do you think I should choose to be my squire? And Alanna is so humble because, I mean, yes, I know people can be naturally humble, but as I mentioned, these people, they're so mature. And in her mature humility, she's just been struggling with whether or not she's good enough to be Jonathan's squire. And so at this point, now that they have defeated the Ysander, she's like, you know what? I should be your squire. He's like, you're right. So she essentially pledges herself to him, and the book ends. So in a way, it's not a bad ending. It's not a, I literally just cut out a chunk of this book and we're going to leave you there ending. But if you look at a book as a whole, one chapter, maybe two chapters, that's the resolution. That's not the entire climax and resolution. And the denouement. So the climax is when we're getting to the big stuff, right? The resolution is kind of when things are coming together. And then the denouement is when we tie off our little odds and ends. They did that. She did that in like 80 pages, which, as I said, a small book, that's probably not that many pages if we actually made it into a normal size book. So it's just, again, the writing. So guys, I gotta tell you, if you've never read Alanna, do it, okay? Read the series, read the Immortals, but I don't really recommend reading it over and over and over unless you're young, because if you've read a really well-written book, you're gonna know this is not a really well-written book. I'm sorry, Tamora Pierce. I have been a fan of yours for 20 years. I'm still a fan of yours. I think your new stuff just keeps getting better, but your old stuff, it's suffering. That's about it. That's it. Anything else I could have said is kind of a reiteration. I gave you the general idea of the book. There you go. Hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next week for something super special, something that will put me in a much better mood. Bye.